Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. For those of you that I've not met face-to-face, my name is Fred Pitsadney. I'm the founder and president of Focus Management, and I'll be presenting this webinar along with Richard Jarofsky, a Focus partner. We got a couple of housekeeping items to deal with first of all. Feel free to take notes during the webinar. However, you should know that we are recording today's session, and it will be made available to you within a couple of days. Secondly, we will be using the Q&A feature today to capture any questions you would like to have answered. So please enter your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We've set aside some time following the presentation, and we'll get to as many questions as we can. Okay, let's get started. You know, 6 months ago, the tone and the subject matter for this webinar would have been so different. The focus would have been on planning how to successfully scale that next peak off in the distance. That peak represented the goals for the business. But then, with little warning, everything changed. In the space of a few short months, the COVID outbreak turned our world literally upside down. Our choices, our options have become severely limited. Now we all need to act quickly and decisively and respond to changes that come at us just about every day as we move towards a new normal, whatever that becomes. To survive and thrive in today's unsettling and turbulent environment, we all need to rethink how we approach planning, managing, and executing our critical priorities. We need to take the tools that we are familiar with and reshape them to fit the world we now find ourselves in. And how has that world changed? Well, for starters, it shut down. I mean, planes stopped flying, borders were closed. People returning home from abroad were either placed in quarantine or voluntarily into self-isolation. You couldn't get where you wanted to. If you did, you couldn't get back. Buyers didn't buy. Sellers couldn't sell. Shippers couldn't ship. Makers couldn't make. Every economy, everywhere, took a severe blow to the head. And on top of all of this, we don't know what's coming next. Is there a second wave? Is this still the first? Will there be a vaccine? What about an antiviral? When will it be safe to go back to something we used to call normal? This pandemic is crushing many paradigms. How we make purchases and what we buy. How we do business and who we do it with. How our businesses operate internally. How we communicate with each other. The list goes on. In the face of this, we need to recognize an important reality. Whoever acts fastest and most decisively will set the pace. And to do this, we need to rethink our approach to planning. In fact, to a great degree, we need to rethink how we think, and especially how we think about planning. Okay, so what are the goals for today? There are 3 of them, which are designed to provide you with a guide or a roadmap on how you can adapt your planning toolkit to today's realities. First of all, the overall goal is to introduce the RAD process that we've successfully used with our clients. Secondly, we'll start by reviewing the underlying key principles that will help you move quickly through your planning and execution stages. And then we'll introduce to you some very specific tools and techniques that are immensely helpful in today's turbulent and uncertain world. Let's start where RAD came from, the fundamental value proposition for all of our work, and then we'll cover the 4 principles, the tools and techniques, and the how-tos. And RAD's fit, sort of where it stands, and who's going to benefit most from it. Every leader, whether of a business unit or a team within, wants the great execution of what matters most. Great execution, however, remains elusive, as most, in fact, it's been published that 75% still struggle with the execution of not only strategic, but operational and project plans. So where do organizations end up? Often it's in one of these other quadrants. Let's start with the orange quadrant, the poor execution of what matters most. This is where you find leaders with great frustration who keep asking, why are we late? Why have we missed the timelines again? Why are there so many errors? Why? I know you guys have been there, and you get the idea. The green quadrant, the great execution of the wrong things, often leads to major embarrassment as the leader answers questions like, if we are so great at getting things done, why is the competition still eating our lunch? Why have we missed our fundraising goal? I'm sure many of you have been faced with those questions, and you get the idea. The black zone is that color for a reason. Businesses and their leaders just don't last very long. I mean, poor execution of the wrong things is a major reason that the majority of startups never, ever see year 2. There are 3 elements that help leaders take their teams to the top right-hand quadrant: clarity, alignment, and commitment. Well, of what exactly? For strategy execution, it's clarity, alignment, and commitment to the long-term focus and the direction of the business. Today, it's about identifying the critical priorities. What do we need to do to survive? And for some, it's how to deal with unusually big demands for their products and services. The bottom axis is about ensuring clarity, alignment, and commitment to action for individual accountabilities. Not being clear and empowered to take action or to make decisions is, according to published studies and our own 50+ years of combined experience with 400 different organizations in 38 different sectors, it's the #1 blockage to great execution. We'll be addressing how to fix this during the webinar. For the next 30 minutes or so, first of all, when you look at what GEM is about, what RAD is about, if you look at GEM on the left-hand side, that's the great execution of what matters most. When you give it a good dose of speed and agility, you get rapid, agile deployment, RAD for short. For the next 30 minutes or so, we're going to focus on the 4 principles you can use to catch the wave and not be crushed beneath it. These 4 principles will be supported by 6 specific techniques and tools. Let's overview the principles first. First of all, engage your people in the process of planning and deploying your plan, and do it early. You know, we've heard a lot of talk about employee engagement over the last decade, mostly empty words, as most organizations are not really doing a better job at it than they were at the turn of the century. Not when it comes to real, meaningful engagement. Quickly means quickly, not weeks or months, but days. You need to power through the execution by doing a few critical processes and doing them right over and over and over again. Planning sessions should be short bursts, like 1 to 2 hours long, not 1 or 2 days, as we're accustomed to during strat planning. You've all heard the saying, no plan survives the first engagement with the enemy, or variations on that theme. Well, it's more than just a truism. A plan that fails to address the rapidly changing realities on the ground is worse than useless, is downright dangerous. Agility and responsiveness will rule. The 4th and final principle: nothing stops a great plan achieving the success it deserves more than the people charged with its execution having only a vague idea of the authority that they have to make decisions and to get important stuff done. We'll cover how to fix that today. So those are the 4 principles. Let's dig into each of them and put some meat on the bones. There are 2 important reasons to ask people about their views and their ideas. The first is they really want to be asked. They want to feel that someone actually cares about what they think. I mean, in their position, wouldn't you? The second reason is that they know things that you don't. not because they're necessarily smarter, but because they're often closer to the action with customers, with suppliers, and with competitors. Listen, the last thing you want to hear during a debrief, especially of a failed initiative, is these words: I could have told you that. You never want to hear those words. It only makes sense if you ask questions, you need to listen to the answers. Nothing turns people off more than taking the trouble to respond to a question only to be totally ignored. Most of us had that experience. It's not pleasant. That must not happen. It's critical to respond in some fashion throughout the entire process. Ask people early enough in the process to make their input useful. I mean, this is during the assessment stage prior to putting pen to paper and creating the plan to take the business forward. This should be one of the very first things that you do. There are a variety of tools, many available at low cost, that can be used to gather this input. SurveyMonkey is one, and there are others. Keep it simple. Don't make it too elaborate or complicated. Ask a few questions and make it very clear as to why the answers matter. We'll look at a couple of examples in just a minute. Whatever information you gather, it needs to feed into your battle planning. Now, why do we call it battle planning? Well, for us, it conveys a completely different level of intensity than conventional strategic planning. This isn't about winning the war. It is about achieving the success we need today that creates a secure and positive tomorrow. The first thing we need to do is quickly come to grips with the situation we find ourselves in, and particularly in 5 key areas of importance. First of all, what is life like today for our customers? How are they being affected? How are their attitudes, preferences, and behaviors changing? What new challenges are they having that might represent opportunities for us? Maybe their need for what we do has decreased, or maybe it's increased due to the present situation. For instance, the dramatic drop in commercial and civil aviation has had a terrible impact on companies that service and repair aircraft components such as wheels and brakes. Sailmakers, on the other hand, who had the capability, have gained from the surge in demand for covers to protect engines as aircraft sit idle. What about our suppliers? We depend on them to operate our business. So how are they holding up? Do we need to be looking for alternatives? We can't afford to have a supply chain that is unreliable due to capacity constraints. As borders closed, many experienced logistical nightmares and still have been able to establish a secure supply of materials and components. As for our competitors, are they showing any signs of weakness that we can exploit? Have their service levels dropped significantly? Are they losing customers? Is there a fire sale opportunity out there? You know, maybe we can snap up some smaller companies that are struggling so we can expand our reach. If we don't, someone else might. One of our clients, a maker of plumbing products, experienced a huge increase in demand for their products because many of their competitors were either unable to operate or they had their supply chains disrupted. Their big challenge, and by the way, put this under the heading of nice problem to have, was how are we going to make enough of our product quickly enough to take advantage of the windfall? I mean, that's a huge challenge for them. What about our people? How are they doing? This has been a very stressful time for many, perhaps all. Are we doing what we can to help them through this? For example, one of our clients shifted work hours to help those who are having difficulty managing childcare. Finally, we need to appraise our operational capability and capacity. Are we able to meet service level requirements and remain cost efficient? If we have excess capacity, can it be redeployed to other areas? As an example, look at the number of companies now making respirators and masks. Remember the survey I mentioned a few minutes ago? Well, these are the kind of questions that we ask. What one thing within our power, and I want to repeat that, what one thing within our power could we do to help you and others deal with and cope better? The first thing you need to ask your people is, how can we help you? How about our customers? What can we do to serve them better? After all, a business without customers, well, it just isn't. What ideas do you have on how we can bond better with them? Perhaps become the trusted go-to company, perhaps even indispensable. We might be suffering operationally, and our less than great performance is damaging our reputation and causing frustration. How can we address those concerns and get better? The answers you receive need to be sorted, sifted, collated, organized, and analyzed. Look for the nuggets, especially those that might seem at first glance to be a little kind of off the page. Include those nuggets in the conversation you have with your core planning team. Set a very small number of objectives. You know what? Richard and I are continually working with organizations that in the best of times and in these times, certainly create these long lists of objectives. So, but you want to get down to a very small number whose achievement will make a significant impact on the business. Make sure they're clear, both in what they are and why they matter, and make them as measurable as possible so you can track your progress toward them. Something like this: increase full order on-time shipment rate to 96% by December 31st without increasing per unit shipping costs. Now, there's an objective that not only drives increased internal efficiency, it also benefits the customer. It's a win-win. Do it quickly. We've talked about this before, and we'll continue to talk about the importance of speed, rapidity. Lean towards action rather than sometimes that deep contemplation mode that we get into. We need to spend more time in planning sessions on creating action plans. Make your planning session short, 1 to 2 hours, 90 minutes, that's actually a great target, and place them in a tight time deadline with whatever you can accommodate. Think about doing maybe 2 or even 3 sessions in a week during the assessment and planning stages. Keep it simple. There's another message that will be throughout this entire presentation. Keep it simple should be your mantra throughout the process. You know, a beautiful plan on paper breaks down if people aren't clear on what they need to do and how the various elements fit together for success. In a moment, we'll look at a very powerful yet simple way of ensuring clarity of your plan. The most common cause of execution failure is that people don't know what is expected of them, as simple as that might seem. They're not clear on what they're supposed to do or the authority that is available to them. We'll cover more about authority clarification in a few minutes. Complexity is also a major barrier when it comes to deciding what to do and then executing it. Richard is going to cover some of the simple yet powerful tools and techniques that you can use. The best thing about all this is that you likely already have them in your toolkit. Richard will include how to make the planning and execution roles crystal clear. Richard, over to you.
All right then, good morning everyone. And I'm gonna carry on from Fred. My focus in particular now is gonna be on filling in some more of the detail. Fred's given you an overview of RAD, sort of where it comes from, how it fits in relation to great execution and what matters most, which is sort of ultimately what this is about, but in particular focusing on speed and agility, which these days in particular is really paramount. I'm going to look at, first of all, sort of take you through the RAD process timeline. And it's broken down into a number of stages. And the first of those is simply getting ready. As we all know, when we approach a planning process, that we need to make sure that when we're going to engage it, that in fact we're prepared. So when we talk about getting ready, there are really 4 things that we need to do. And first of those is to figure out, well, who's going to be doing the planning exactly? Who's going to be on that core planning team? Is it the senior management team? Is it senior managers plus mid-level managers and other people? So it's really about identifying who those folks are going to be. And then secondly, who are we going to survey? Whose input do we want into the process when we think about the employees in the organization? You know, we've had some clients that have said, I want input from everyone who wants to provide it. So in fact, let's go to all of them. In other cases, it might be restricted to a smaller group within the organization. But right up front, we have to figure out who those folks are going to be so that we can go out to them. We can create the survey, send it out, get the results back, do some analysis, as Fred said, the sort of sifting and sorting and collating, so that that can be turned back into the core planning team in the form of some preparation, some pre-work that they can do as we initiate the process. Now, this is about 5 days of activity, and typically we do it a week before the initiation. And by the initiation, I really mean engaging the process with the assessment stage. And that's what comes next. So the first step in planning is to say, well, what's going on? And in particular, what is our situation? And as Fred said, it's those 5 critical elements. What's going on within them? And what do we need to recognize and potentially think about how to respond to? And there are 3 major activities as part of assessment, and each of them forms a work session. And again, these are typically anywhere from an hour to 2 hours, but most often somewhere around 90 minutes in length. The first of those focuses on the external world. It looks at customers, it looks at suppliers, it looks at competitors, and the idea is to understand what's going on among each of those groups that should be important to us. Then we look inside and we look at our people. We think about what's going on with them. And we look at ourselves operationally and try to assess, what the issues are, what the challenges are. Sometimes they are very positive things. The example that Fred gave earlier of one of our clients who, in fact, their big problem was figuring out how to satisfy the demand that they had in front of them. In other cases, it's quite the opposite. Well, out of all of those, we need to figure out what are the critical few priorities. We might have identified 30, 40, 50, 100 things, but we need to really boil that down to the few critical priorities. That's days 1 to 5. So if we thought about a RAD process starting on the Monday, essentially by Friday, the assessment part of it has been completed. And by then, we have that sort of finger on the pulse. We have a good sense of what's going on. And most importantly, we know what should drive our conversation through planning and then ultimately through deployment. Well, that takes us now to the planning phase. And there are 3 major activities here. Again, 3 separate work sessions. The first of those is to figure out exactly what is it that we aim to accomplish? What are the near horizon objectives that are going to drive our planning and drive our action? And when we say near horizon, in contrast to strategic planning, where we might be thinking at the minimum 18 months out, more likely 2 to 3 years out, this is near horizon. This is 3 to 6 months, and saying, okay, based on what's in front of us, what do we feel we need to achieve in terms of results over this next few month period? Well, then based on that, you say, well, if we want to accomplish those things, we're going to have to do some stuff. We're going to have to put in place some kind of action plan, some kinds of initiatives. And when we establish what those are, when we select the few that we're going to execute, we also need to understand what the leadership is going to be. Who is going to drive each of those? Who's going to have ultimate accountability to make things happen and to get results? And then finally, for each of those initiatives, how are we going to resource them? Do we need to apply people to them? Do we need to apply technology? Do we need to provide funding? We need to be really clear up front on that so we don't get somewhere down the road with implementing an initiative and have to hit the brakes because, well, we've run out of resources. We really didn't plan it out well. And then finally, what sort of authority is required by the leader of that initiative so that they are not roadblocked as they go along and they're able to execute the things that they have in front of them to do. Well, this is days 8 to 15. Essentially, it's the second week of the RAD process once we have initiated. And at this point, we've got a plan. We've got clear measures of success. We've got objectives. We know what we're trying to accomplish. We've established the initiatives. We've got the ownership and the authority clear as well. So those are the first three phases of RAD, and what remains is deployment. But I want to take you through now and talk a little bit about some of the tools and techniques that our clients have found really helpful, especially given the need to do RAD quickly and to be very agile. Well, the first of these is something that we call the 3W chart. And you may be familiar with it. It's often referred to as an action plan chart. And it's a way of capturing what needs to get done, who needs to make sure that it does get done, and then finally the timing by which that is expected to happen. Now, often what happens is that there's a conversation among that core planning team, and they come to the conclusion, as they did in this case, that, really two individuals are going to share in that. Making the decision is going to belong to both Robin and Tony. Well, that's fine. They may both be very, very involved in making the decision, but one person really needs to be ultimately accountable for it. So once they've made that determination, we put a star next to their name, and now Robin knows that they have ultimate accountability for taking that action and achieving it by that timeline. Well, that's a very simple version of the 3W. In some cases, a client will say, well, that's fine, but I really want to add some other information to it. And of course, we can do that. So for instance, what about resources? We need to know what sort of resources are going to be applied to each of those action items so that they can be successful. So whatever the case, whether it's resources or other things, we can enrich that chart and add that information. Of course, the thing we want to be careful of is not trying to put too much up there and writing pages and pages. Keep it net, keep it tight, keep it specific, and keep it focused on the things that are most important to capture. Well, once you've done it, you can put that information into an Excel spreadsheet. You can manipulate it, sort it, sift it, do graphics from it. In some organizations, though, they want to put it into a project management application so that you can track things like critical paths and dependencies and such. It's really a question of the degree of sophistication you want to inject into the process. So that's the 3W chart. Here's another one that clients find really helpful. And this is helpful in any situation, but I think especially these days, and especially within RAD, given the need, as Fred said earlier, to lean towards action rather than deep contemplation, and to be able to get a lot done within short periods of time, within a 90-minute planning meeting, for instance. Whereas historically, in the past, we might have thought about meetings that could take a half a day or a day or even more. So here are a few that have been found to be really, really helpful. The first of those is make your point and do it quickly. Don't, not long conversations, don't expound on it, just say, here's what I think, here's what I know, here's what I've experienced, here's what, whatever it is, my opinion, my fact, whatever the case, do it quickly. Secondly, let's not get caught up in trying to be perfect. Let's not get caught up in trying to hit the bullseye every time. Let's get it close enough for now. It may be that somewhere down the road, we need to finesse it a little bit more, that's fine. But at this point in time, let's settle for close. Keeping focused, no sidetracking, making sure that conversations stay on topic. Use a parking lot, capture those things that might lead that group off on a tangent that may not be helpful at all, and certainly will affect the productivity and efficiency of that meeting. They may be important at some point, so you don't want to lose them. One speaker, if you're doing meetings online especially, having more than one person talk at a time makes it almost impossible to figure out who I should be listening to right now, who's got the token, the floor, the whatever. So having one speaker at a time, really, really critical, especially in online environments. And then finally, the 80% rule, very similar to the second, close is good enough. It really represents the idea that every conversation, every decision-making process eventually hits a point of diminishing returns. And you come to the conclusion that, what, we haven't really added any value to the discussion. All we've done is kind of circled around and around. So can somebody in this meeting please put up their hand or whatever and say, I think we're 80% there. Can we figure out where there is, capture that, and then move on? Here's another one that clients have found really helpful, and it's called Spitball decision-making. And it's Spitball as in not the illegal pitch in baseball, but Spitball as in, let's kind of throw things against the wall and see what sticks. So not a super sophisticated and scientific approach to making decision making, but one that's really designed to help teams go from a lot to a lot less quickly so that they can really focus in on the things that are most important. Well, whatever the initiative or whatever the objective, there are always going to be a list of things that we could do in order to accomplish it. Thing is, they're not all created equal. Some of them are potentially great ideas, others somewhat less so, and a few are probably even contradictory. You couldn't do both of them because they'd undo each other. So how do we choose? Well, here's a really simple approach, a simple method, if you will, of how to do that. And it really looks at sort of the traditional cost-benefit approach, and there are other ways to use the Spitball as well. So if you look at that grid, those 4 zones, let's start with the best deal zone. So the best deal zone, which is in green, says, well, here is something that is going to give us a lot in return with a very small investment, very small cost and effort. And you say, wow, that sounds like a great deal. So that's probably something that we want to think about doing for sure. You've got the justifiable zone that says, well, it's going to give us a lot back, but we also have to invest quite a bit in order to get it. It may be justifiable, and in particular, if we don't see much over in the green, we want to look at things that fall into the red. We've got the why bother zone. The why bother zone is things that we look at them and we assess what they're going to return in terms of their value. And we say, it's not going to give us much. I mean, it's not going to cost much to do, but I'm not sure we bother doing it. And then we've got the no way zone. And the no way zone is things that are going to cost a lot, take a lot of effort to execute, to implement, and they're not going to give us much back. So why on earth would we even consider doing them? And of course, in the middle, because there's always a gray zone, there's always a maybe. Maybe those things just need to be explored a little further, and we figure out where to push them one way or the other. Well, ultimately, it's about plotting out these things. I mean, we have a client that was doing brainstorming for ideas to make improvements on their manufacturing floor. And they came up with something like 130. It was a very long list. And they looked at the list and they said, well, clearly we can't, shouldn't even try to do all of these things. So how are we going to start to work this list down? And they used Spitballing. And they took that list, they worked it down considerably. They still had too many things to do. They said, okay, let's do it again. And they did it again. So they ultimately figured out what were the few things of that 130 that in fact they wanted to carry forward and to implement. All right, so those are a couple of tools that I wanted to share. Let's move on to the last couple of principles. And you know, once the decision has been made what to do, and we start to do things, then it's about keeping agile and maintaining sort of a responsiveness in the organization. So first thing we need to do is make sure that we're checking on progress often. And this could mean, for instance, doing short check-ins several times a week. And these might be only 5 to 10 or 15 minutes long, but it's really important to make sure that we're aware of what's going on, what's working well and what's not working well. That in fact, if the plan is not working, if there are elements in there, initiatives that are not getting the results that you want, change the plan. Why would we continue to do it? You know, what's attributed to Einstein as the definition of insanity is doing the same thing repeatedly and expecting a different outcome. Well, let's nip that really early in the process and change the plan. It may be that it's the wrong thing to do. It may be that we're doing the right thing, but we're doing it the wrong way. So let's understand what's going on. And there's another thought, which is calling an audible. And in North American football, so not soccer, an audible is when, you know, the quarterback calls a play in the huddle, they break from the huddle, they go to the line of scrimmage, they line it, they get down over the ball, quarterback looks up over the center, looks at how the defense is aligned, and comes to the conclusion really quickly, that play is just going to get us into trouble. In fact, it's not going to get us where we want to go at all. So he calls an audible. He using coded language, essentially says, okay, everybody, we're not going to do that. We're now going to do this. The most important thing when that call is made is that everybody hears it, first of all, and that secondly, everybody now knows what they need to do differently. Well, I want to talk now about that fourth principle, which is about delegating authority. And this is really about making sure that people have enough authority, and we often use the term requisite, meaning it's not too much authority, it's also not too little. You know, think of this as sort of the Goldilocks position. It's just right. It needs to be very specific, very clear, and that we can also think about increasing the authority that people have in order to make them more efficient and more productive and able to get things done and done quickly. We use an equation sometimes to get the point across here, a couple of different ways. This one is responsibility without authority leads to frustration. If I've been given responsibility for implementing an initiative and I don't have enough authority to do it and to be efficient and effective, I'm going to be frustrated. Quite possible also, I'm not going to get it done or done on time. And that's going to hurt me, and that may hurt the business as well. And that leads us to the other expression, which is that responsibility without authority results in delays. Things simply take too long to get done. Well, when it comes to defining authority, we like to do it in a pretty simple way by looking at 4 levels. The first level we call just do it. This says I can go and do something. I don't have to ask first or tell later. Second level says, well, tell me after. So this is where my team leader expects me, and it's an obligation to tell that person after I've decided or after I've taken the action. Level 3 that says take me first, tell me first rather, which means what it says, my team leader needs to be told first. And then finally, the 4th level, which is make a suggestion, and the team leader will decide. Well, I think it's easiest for this to make sense if we use an example. So let me use one. This is a manager within an organization who's going to implement some changes on the shop floor. Well, the first of those says, spend within budget, follow the policies, you know, pretty much stay within your lane and don't get into trouble. This is a level 1. It's pretty vanilla. The second one that says, what about approving new suppliers for ongoing operations? Well, this one gets a level 2 because the team leader needs to know afterwards so that that person isn't embarrassed when somebody comes to them and says, what's this about changes in our suppliers? What's going on? And the team leader doesn't know. So that's a level 2, tell me after. In the case of making changes that are going to affect people, this is a level 3, let's say, minor impact, so that my team leader needs to know before I do it. And then finally, those that are going to have significant impact are a level 4. In other words, I go to my team leader and I say, listen, these are the changes that I feel should be made. I have a level 4 on this because of the extensiveness of the impact. Therefore, you need to decide. You need to be the one to say, do this, do that, yes or no, or to amend my proposal and my suggestion. Now, these levels can be used to define authority within a project that has a limited lifespan. They can also be used to define authorities within any role within an organization on a day-to-day basis. And again, it's about making sure that it's specific, that it's clear, and that it's appropriate. All right, I'm going to turn things back to Fred now. It's going to take us into the home stretch. Fred?
Okay, thanks, Richard. So listen, how does RAD fit in today's COVID world? Well, leaders from all walks of life are feeling pretty frustrated about how fast things are changing. They're worried about the uncertainty about what they should be doing and sometimes even how to do it. They're worried about, so what are my critical priorities and what should I be doing about them so that what matters most today gets done and gets done quickly. And this is exactly what the RAD approach delivers, right? So when you combine the great execution of what matters most, what's on the left side of the screen, with the speed and agility that you need in the COVID world, you get rapid agile deployment. Okay, so for those who would like some professional guidance to implement RAD in their organization, here's the cost for a hands-on, step-by-step, let's avoid the landmines facilitation of RAD. For the basic RAD package, which includes, first of all, the survey administration, Secondly, for getting your core planning team organized and ready. Next are the 6 working sessions, and they're delivered according to the schedule developed by the core planning team. And then there's 1 checkpoint meeting that we do to provide a bit of a template to use for subsequent checkpoint meetings that are done by the client themselves. The full no surprises price is $15,000 to $18,000 plus applicable taxes. This is for a completely virtual process. The $3,000 price range difference is to accommodate survey administration, which is a function of the number of employees. More employees, obviously, the more the cost. Okay, we've got a few minutes. It's 11:41 to take on some questions. Richard, do we get any through?
Yeah, Fred, we do have 1 question, which is, does RAD replace strategic planning, or should the 2 sort of complement each other?
Right. Yeah, this is a pretty common question that we get asked quite a bit. And the answer is no. RAD should not be replacing strategic planning. Now, you want to make sure that both of those 2 processes are in line. And very often what happens, because RAD includes a mini SWOT analysis, that sometimes what you learn during the RAD approach may influence what you specified in your strat plan. The other thing that we're seeing happening is that the time horizon for strategic planning is shrinking. I don't know whether COVID is pushing that or not. I suspect so. But over the years, we've seen planning reduce from 10 years to 5 years to 3 years is kind of the going rate right now. But we're now seeing clients saying, let's look out at least no more than 2 years. So I think that that's happening. So to summarize, no, it does not replace strat planning, but you want to make sure those 2 are in alignment. Now, the other thing that you want to consider is that in the strategic planning process, there's a lot of the tools and techniques that Richard covered that can be very, very helpful during the strat planning process. I mean, that Spitball decision-making is a gem. It really is, and it really reduces the amount of time that takes for sifting and sorting ideas. The rules of engagement, I mean, always very, very helpful. The 3W chart, making sure that things are really clear. And I would really push the idea of making sure that even at the strategic level, that the authority for getting those big initiatives done is very clearly specified, so there's no doubt. Okay, any other questions come in, Richard?
No, Fred, that's it for questions.
Okay, listen, we want you to hang on just for like another minute. There's a very short poll that we want you to do. It takes about a minute really to do it. We try to practice what we preach here at Focus. We want to know how we did against the goals that we identified at the beginning of the session. So I won't go through the goals. They're identified in the poll. Take like 30 seconds and do those for us, and then we'll wrap up in just literally 45 seconds or so. Richard?
Okay, poll is open. I'm going to close the poll in about 10 seconds and we'll be ready to close. All right, thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot for doing that poll. And thank you very much for participating in this webinar. We know that you're all busy people, so we do want to thank you very much for attending. Richard, thanks a lot for your help on this. Really appreciate it. Again, thanks everyone. There's some contact information just on the left-hand side. Most of you have either Richard or myself's email address. There's a phone number there. Please feel free to reach out and chat with us anytime. And at 11:45, we're going to shut down. with another on-time delivery by focus management. Cheers.